Okay, yeah, yeah.
So the webinar has started. We are getting some people in and let me.
Yeah, you got 3 attendees.
Yeah, we were hearing from perfect. There we go.
Hey now, look at that. So good morning to everyone who's coming in. We're gonna get started in about 3 minutes. So lovely to have you all here. We will be starting soon.
From the attendees are. Let's see.
Another minute maybe.
Since I'm not the host, I can actually put my emails too, I think.
Hey, Hillary, I was thinking, would it be useful if I gave you a set of links? Because I'm going to go through a bunch of
Totally.
resources.
Absolutely.
Okay.
I would love that.
All right. So we'll do after this, I'll send you a list, like a narrated list of all the links so that all our attendees, we can send out all the resources we'll send them to.
Awesome. Great. Yeah, that's perfect because we're gonna put together like a bit of a fact sheet.
Perfect.
So that would be absolutely what we are looking for.
Then they don't have to watch an hour recording of me yakking the whole time.
I don't know. It would be worth it though.
Make a few jokes. We'll make it interesting today for sure.
Get more people. Oops, as I just. All right, well, let's get started. So welcome everyone for coming. Today we are going to be talking about lawn care done right with Carl Scamenti. A little bit of information about Carl. He is an urban environmental scientist in the Turfgrass Science Research Unit at Cornell University. After graduating in 2014 with a BS in environmental engineering from Cornell University, he pursued professional golf on several professional golf courses for a few years before returning to Cornell as an employee. He has worked on reduced risk turfgrass management of New York State Park golf courses through judicious use of pesticides, nutrients, and water, and now focuses on data-driven management to maximize ecosystem service value of urban green spaces. Just as a reminder, this will be recorded and we will put it on our website. And if you guys have any questions, you can feel free to put them in the Q&A, please. And we'll have some time at the end to go through them. And next presentation. Up next, we have learning the basics of tree care on Thursday, May 19th from 12 to 1 as well with Ken Olmsted. And he will be speaking about finding an arborist with the perspective of being an arborist. Okay, Carl, take it away. I'm so happy to have you here.
Yeah, thanks, Hillary. Make sure you can share, you can see my screen there in presentation
Yep.
mode. Hillary. Perfect. I'm interested to see Ken's, I'll probably join you guys for that tree care. I'd like Ken, I've interacted with him.
Oh, nice.
I'd like to learn more about trees. So Hillary, as you introduced, I'm kind of a turf grass person nowadays. Have my history in golf course turf the last 5 years. Worked here at Cornell with Dr. Frank Rossi, the leader of our turfgrass program, focusing on golf courses and reducing pesticide use, pesticide risk. We measure that in certain ways, really trying to use data to make golf courses more efficient, not only to be better for golfers, but better for the environment, trying to use less inputs and produce a better surface. So now I've transitioned into this idea of urban green space, which is dominated by turf grass, but obviously has other plants in it. And I think really is summed up well by this quote here. We're consuming the natural landscape by building urban areas. We're building impermeable surfaces, right? That's concrete, that's buildings, it's parking lots. And all of this increases the value and the need for urban green space. And what urban green space does, in addition to recreation, it gives us ecosystem services. So that's a term you'll hear me say a couple of times today. So what is ecosystem services? What is the value urban green space provides? Well, it does it in a couple different ways. So this is a paper from actually our colleagues here at Cornell. Grant Thompson is now out in Iowa State as a professor, and Jenny Cow-Niffen is weed ecologist here at Cornell. So there's different ways it can provide ecosystem services. It can give us things, provisioning, like ground cover, fresh water, right? It filters water as rain falls through plants and through the dense turf matrix. It can regulate things like air temperature, right? Climate regulation, again, water purification, storing carbon. It can do things for us in that respect. And then culturally and socially, like it gives us value, aesthetic value, right? And that's, I'm sure a lot of you homeowners and folks with lawns here today are interested in that portion. Recreation and athletics, right? We use turf. We don't run all over trees and shrubs. We run over our turf grass, though. We treat it pretty poorly, but there's value in that. And so I'll talk about these today. Supporting surfaces is really more about soil health. I won't talk about that, but the bottom line here is there's value that you can derive from turf grass in urban areas. And important to note that lawns are 50 to 70% of urban green space. So obviously a lot of turf grass in urban green space. So how do we quantify that sort of value? And this is all background on why we should manage lawns. The first thing is stormwater, right? So there's real value in having plants that suck up water, that return it into the ground, versus what that land would be if it was a parking lot or a series of apartment buildings, right? Where you're having to build stormwater infrastructure, pipes under the ground, get water to a sewage treatment plant and treat it. So a bunch of studies that looked at this, and they've come up with numbers anywhere from $1,300 to $8,000 per acre per year that urban green space is worth, just looking at the stormwater benefits, right? And you actually see a couple numbers, and this is, I looked at a bunch of studies here that tried to quantify this number. You see some real outliers: $70,000 per year, $35,000 per acre per year. Some pretty optimistic assumptions in those, but the bottom line is we can kind of put some numbers to what turf can do for us. And that's from a regulating perspective. This is provisioning. What does it give us? It gives us home value. I'm sure a lot of you guys are interested in that today. Here's a study that looked at a bunch of similar homes down in Texas. They looked at homes with an average landscape quality. So they looked at trees and the turf grass and the beds versus good quality. And they found that if you can go to good quality, you can increase your home value by 6% almost. And furthermore, if you can make it an excellent quality landscape, you can improve your home value by 11%, right? So real tangible economic benefits there. And the bottom line from that study is if you invest $1 into your landscape, you're going to get $1.35 back. So return on investment or tangible value. And then there's this cultural and societal benefit that's a little tougher to quantify in terms of dollar and cents, but makes sense really intuitively. The only reason we can have a sustainable urban place is because of urban green spaces. You'll notice in urban areas that don't do so well, they don't have a lot of urban green space, and that's a function of poor city planning. urban areas that are very functional and successful have a lot of urban green space. We know that folks who live closer to urban green spaces in urban areas are more physically and mentally fit than people who live farther away. The cleanliness of urban green space, that speaks to the management of it. That's what we're going to talk about today. Relieves mental stress, removes depression if it's managed appropriately, and creates social interaction, right? Social cohesion. Obviously, with COVID in the last 2 years, urban green spaces, outside, recreation, allowing us to see other people, there's a real value and benefit to that. And then all of this is in the context of an increasingly urbanizing society here in America. About 8 in 10 of Americans right now live in urban areas. That number is going to go to 9 in 10 by 2050 almost. We're going to double the land mass that is classified as urban land in the next 40 years. So there is a huge opportunity here for me to educate and for everyone to implement high quality urban green space. And that all starts with lawns and turf grass, right? So talking about all these ecosystem services here on the left, if we're managing our grass appropriately, we get all those. But we got to be careful. There's a fine line here, because if we are managing these areas poorly, if we're not mowing them, fertilizing them correctly, we can actually create ecosystem disservices, right? We get dust pollution if we're mowing bare lawns that are dry. If we're mowing too much, we're expending excess fuel, greenhouse gases, overuse of water, pesticides, fertilizer, right? So we have to manage these areas appropriately to get the ecosystem services. If we don't do that, we can make things go bad in a hurry. So the first thing, we're now getting to the nitty gritty here, lawn management. Before we start, I want you all to think about the goals for your lawn area. Is it this sort of traditional green grass approach? This is fine. This has, like we just discussed, it's got recreational value. It's got aesthetic value, right? You want this dense, uniform green. Maybe you're kicking a soccer ball around on it. It's good for that. If you're like me, here's my home 3 years ago when we bought it. Hasn't changed a whole lot since. I just want green cover. I just want there to be plants on the ground. I don't want erosion. I don't want dust kicking up whenever I mow. I've got a pretty low bar myself. Other people like, you can call it environmentally friendly. These are pollinator lawns, right? They have flowering. People would classify them as weeds, white clover, creeping thyme. These are great places for pollinators to forage. We have a real issue with pollinator decline, and these are areas that can benefit those pollinators. So whatever your goal is today, it's important to have that mindset before I start talking about the principles of management, because that's going to kind of guide the ways you or your landscaper contractor that you work with, how they should manage the landscape. All right, so the most important thing that we do on lawns, the most intensive thing we do is mowing. And there's a couple key principles here I want to go through today. The first one is the 1/3 rule. And this is a little weird to describe here, but pretty simple. You don't want to mow off more than 1/3 of the leaf blade. An example that's easy to give is if you have the mower set at 3 inches, you can allow the grass to grow to a maximum height of 4.5 inches before you mow, right? So if you allow it to grow to 5 inches and you cut it down to 3 inches, you've mowed off more than 1/3 of the leaf blade. Why is that bad? You can see here in the background an example of, actually, this is a golf course mower that was set improperly, but you can see the areas every couple feet, right, where this mower, we call it scalping, where it mowed off more than 1/3 of the leaf blade. And you can see that the turf is obviously stressed, it's yellowed. The evolutionary response of turf grass, when it gets that much of the leaf blade removed, is to respond with excess growth, right? It's like an animal just foraged on the turf grasses. And it's like, oh my God, to survive, I got to get my solar panels, my leaf blades, I got to divert all my resources to that. And so what you do is you deplete its energy reserves, you increase its susceptibility to drought and heat and pest stress later on in the year. So we want to avoid removing more than 1/3 of the leaf blade. That's rule number 1 for mowing. That's tied into how high you mow. Mow high. May, June, July is a slogan I just heard from one of our colleagues the other day. 3 inches or more. I would say at least 3 inches, unless you're looking at a lawn where you want to play soccer, at a high level. Let's mow the lawn higher. Why is that? Here's a good image over here that shows when you mow higher, you get a deeper root system, right? So if you're 3.5 inches, you can get roots. This is a little optimistic, probably more like 6 inches in depth. But if you're mowing at this shorter height of cut, the roots are going to be shorter as well. Why is it important for deep rooting? You can access water. The turf can access water deeper in the soil profile, nutrients deeper in the soil profile. So longer rooting is better. You're going to get that with higher mowed grass. You can shade out weeds if you mow higher. That's another benefit. The clippings, I know clippings and clumping is a real issue for a lot of people. The higher you mow, the easier those clippings will settle in. And this actually requires less mowing if you mow high. And here's the reason why. This is sort of a 1/3 rule table. If you're mowing at 3.5 inches, you can cut it to a maximum height of at 5.25 inches. That means you let the grass grow 1 3/4 inches before you mow. If you're going to set the mower at 2 inches, a shorter height of cut, you can let it grow to 3 inches. You're only allowing the turf to grow 1 inch before you have to cut it. So needless to say, the turf takes a lot longer to grow 1 3/4 inches than it does 1 inch. You're going to reduce the number of times you mow in a season. And for me, I like that. I'm a lazy homeowner. I would like to mow less. So mowing higher allows you to mow less. Will you mow on a schedule? And I know a lot of landscape contractors probably do this. Maybe they do, maybe they don't. A lot of homeowners certainly do. Go out and mow once a week, once every 2 weeks. The grass does not grow on a schedule. Here's an image of a textbook image actually from our resources. The turf grass will grow a little bit more in the spring, right? You get that spring surge, temperatures warm up. There's enough precipitation, starts to get lighter out for longer. You decrease in growth during the summer, right? It's hot and it's dry, get a little bit more of an increase. This is kind of the standard textbook model of growth. Here's what it looks like in real life. This is my lawn from the last growing season, 2021. For sure, we saw that increase in spring growth, but it actually leveled out the rest of the year. And this is important to know because, again, if we're following that 1/3 rule, I had to mow 1, 2, 3, 4 times there in the first month of the season because the grass is growing a lot and I don't want to violate the 1/3 rule. The rest of the season, I was allowed to extend my mowing intervals because the grass wasn't growing as much. So really mowing based on that growth, tying back to the 1/3 rule is important so that you're mowing the correct amount. If you're mowing once a week or mowing twice a week, there'll be times where you're mowing when you don't need to, right? And maybe that's a carbon emissions issue, just a too much labor issue. And then there'll be times where you're not mowing enough and you're violating the 1/3 rule, you're scalping the turf, you're getting clipping buildup, right? So issues can happen when you're not mowing according to growth. Speaking of clippings, here's that clipping issue for those of you watching. We've got these clumps of clippings. People see this. What likely happened is you violated the 1/3 rule. Now you've got clippings all over the place. And what a lot of people do is when they see this for the first time, they'll start bagging the clippings. So removing those clippings, putting them in a bag, and when they come off the mower, and then composting them or disposing them. The clippings are actually good fertilizer for the turf. They're comprised of 3% nitrogen, 1% phosphorus, 2% potassium. It's a fertilizer. So if you can return those clippings, leave the bag off the mower, mulch them into the turf, you're actually going to reduce your fertilizer requirements in the future. You can actually increase carbon sequestration. That's an ecosystem service, according to this study. So if you can recycle those clippings, get them back into the lawn without this clumping issue, which you won't have if you mow according to the 1/3 rule, that's a really good thing and a tenet I would suggest to everybody out there. So just real quick, the principles of mowing, it all comes back to this 1/3 rule, right? So how high you mow, I'd prefer to see you 3.5 inches, maybe even 4 inches for some folks. That's connected to the 1/3 rule, how often you mow based on growth, and recycling those clippings, recycling, however you want to say it. Get those clippings back into the lawn and allow the turf to recycle those nutrients so you don't have to add on extra. All right, lawn irrigation. So up in our neck of the woods, up here in Ithaca, I would say less than 5% of folks have lawn irrigation. We really don't have very many issues with precipitation. We've gotten a lot over the last couple of years, but you folks down there have hotter, longer growing seasons. So in a lot of cases, you need lawn irrigation. Again, just some basic principles we'll talk about today, how to irrigate your lawn. So when does grass need water? It is when soil moisture is low. And the theme again for today is this doesn't occur on a schedule, right? So here's some data from Ithaca, New York. This is 6 years worth of data. We've got soil moisture here on the y-axis. And this is the days through the year, January through December. I know from observations that when we get below this 20% threshold, we start to see drought stress on the turf. So it's not until we get below 20% that we start to see drought stress. If I had an irrigated lawn, I don't, but if I did, and I knew that 20% threshold is when I need to irrigate. Last year, I would have not irrigated. 2021, we were above that line the entire year. I wouldn't have had to turn on that irrigation system. And in fact, I wouldn't have had to turn it on in 2019 or 2017. So 3 of the last 6 years up here in Ithaca, I wouldn't have needed to irrigate. But then we also have this year, this is 2016 here. We spent 5 straight months in that drought stress. So this isn't really important for those of you who have irrigation systems who maybe have it on a timer, a Monday, Wednesday, Friday timer. Grass does not need water on a timer. It needs water when soil moisture is low, and Mother Nature controls soil moisture to a large degree. So just illustrating the point there that year to year, you're going to use wildly different amounts of water. And so here's what happens when you overwater. You get diseases like red thread. We've got brown patch and tall fescue here. When you overwater your lawn and you keep it oversaturated, the insects like to move in. They like to lay their eggs there. There's some white grubs we dug up in the last couple of years. And if the grubs don't chew your turf roots to death, the skunks and raccoons will come in and they will rototill it for you to find all those juicy grubs. So another kind of consequence of overwatering. And then another one here is the growth habit of turf grass will actually change based on how you water it. So here's an overwatered rough area on a golf course. You can see all the turf is up in that 1 to 2 inch range. We call that thatch. You may have heard of thatch before. That can cause also all sorts of issues for turf health. So a lot of consequences there of overwatering. Underwatering, are there consequences? Yes. You can have the turf go dormant. It can die a little bit. Here's some fine fescues that went dormant up in Minnesota. But all you need to do is add water if it's dormant and it will come back. So underwatering, generally easier to fix than overwatering. So again, thinking back to when turf needs water, when soil moisture is low, if we've got our system on a timer, we're most likely going to be overwatering. Soil type matters. If you have a sandy soil, a lot of our Long Island folks have sandy soils. They're great for drainage. They resist compaction. That's really good, but they don't hold water as much. So if you have a sandier based soil, you're going to need to irrigate more. On the other end, here's a nice clay, silty, heavy soil. We call these heavy soils. They like to hold water. They got a lot of small pore spaces that hold on to water. We'll generally need less irrigation during the year. And so here's where we get to really the mechanics of watering. When soil moisture is low and it's time to water, there are 2 ways to water. You can do a deep and infrequent method, which is really trying to run the irrigation for a longer period of time. You're trying to wet the top 6 to 10 inches of the soil moisture profile, right? You're trying to wet this whole area in only one event maybe, versus light and frequent, which is a couple events, really short cycles, right? I'm going to run the irrigation the next 3 days for 20 minutes. So those are the 2 methods to water. And you can see here, this image really kind of depicts how the grass will grow differently based on how you choose to water. And so if you water light and frequent, here's what's going to happen. I just showed that image of short roots. Basically what you do if you're doing a light and frequent system is you're only wetting the top 1 to 2 inches of the soil moisture profile. And the turf is sitting there like, okay, you're only going to water me 1 to 2 inches. I'm not going to grow my roots deeper than that. Why do I need to stretch down low when you're going to give me all the water up here? So it will grow very short roots. It will be accustomed to that. And then when it experiences real drought stress, it won't be able to access soil moisture down below. So this will be less drought resistant than this deep and infrequent way of watering, which because you're wetting that top 6 to 10 inches of the soil, the turf is experiencing that soil moisture all the way down, and it will extend its roots to where the water is. It will develop a more deep root system. Again, that's good for accessing more water. Another benefit, it can access more nutrients down further in the soil. So we would recommend deep and infrequent methods of watering, less frequent times you're watering with a longer application time, setting it for longer. That can get pretty complicated, right? And maybe that's a little hard to follow. We have a lawn watering tool. Our Cornell Northeast Regional Climate Center helped us develop this. Real simple, you enter your zip code, the last time you watered, and it will tell you if you should water, if you should not water. If you're setting your own irrigation system, this can be a little cumbersome, right? You have to check it every morning and okay, got to go on my thing, type it in. Do I water? Do I not water? If you're not interested in that, the best option, and even the best option overall, is smart irrigation controllers. There's two kinds. There's one kind that uses Wi-Fi and connects to the local weather stations and uses evapotranspiration and precipitation to plan your irrigation automatically. A really good option. It's probably $300 to $400 when I was looking at these, what they'll run you. Here's a soil moisture based approach. In theory, this is the best approach. You have little soil moisture meters here that you stick in your lawn. You can do them in your garden bed as well. And that will relay information directly to the irrigation controller, which will plan irrigation accordingly. So two different options here. The weather-based ones are more ubiquitous in the marketplace. They're the first ones that came on the scene. They're a little bit more developed. But either way, and they're a little bit cheaper too, which may make you want to go that route. Either of these ways are going to be better ways to water than me manually looking every day and setting the timer. And that's even me as a turfgrass person. I would rather just farm it out to the models. I trust those models a lot more than I trust my eye watering. So, there's a big EPA program, this Water Sense program, that they will certify individual products to meet their specifications. So you can go on their website, you can search for irrigation controllers. That might be a good way if you're in the marketplace for a smart controller, figure out which ones are certified. And just to note here, the EPA estimates 50% of water is wasted due to overwatering. So again, we want to avoid those overwatering issues. Smart controllers are an excellent way to handle that. Rebates, Hillary mentioned a couple folks had questions on rebates. I couldn't find anything on Westchester specifically. I found some stuff in Hicksville, which I think is down in Long Island. They can get a rebate of $150. Rockland, Putnam, and Orange County, customers of the Suez, I think that's an energy company. I'm not quite sure. I'm not familiar with them, but they'll give folks a $50 rebate if they buy smart irrigation controllers. So options to offset your cost if understandably that's getting more expensive. I will mention that these systems can save $80. They can save $100, $50 per year on your water bill. So even looking at a return on investment there, $300 maybe in the grand scheme of things isn't so much. So those are the basics of lawn irrigation, right? We've got soil moisture controls it all, right? So you don't need to irrigate unless soil moisture is low. We want to try and avoid overwatering if we can, more issues with that than underwatering. And let's use data if we can. I trust those simple models a lot more than I trust my eye. All right, fertilizer. The most overcomplicated aspect of turfgrass management by far that I see, and that's not just lawns, that's golf courses, it's sports fields. And I remember back to my 7th grade social studies teacher, Mr. Saul, whenever I or some other person in the class would try and answer a question in a more complicated fashion than it needed to be answered, he would start blowing kisses at us. And he would say, kiss, kiss, keep it simple, stupid. Now he probably would get fined or thrown out, but really resonated with me. I remember that for my whole life, that sometimes it doesn't need to be super complicated. Sometimes it can be real simple. Let's keep it simple. Just two things today. What nutrients matter, number one, and number two, when and how much should we apply? So nutrients that matter. Nitrogen. Nitrogen is the primary nutrient you should be concerned with. It drives growth, recovery, and color in lawns. End of story. That's number one. I felt like I should at least mention phosphorus here, and this is kind of to scale, right? How much you should care about any of these nutrients. The only reason I mentioned phosphorus is because legally in New York, you can only apply it on turf grass in two scenarios. One, if you have a soil test indicating you're deficient in phosphorus, and even that's problematic. Certain soil tests probably over-recommend fertilizer. And the second situation is if you're establishing a brand new turf grass seeding. So we know that phosphorus is important for turf grass to establish. You could actually argue based on some new data that maybe phosphorus doesn't need to be applied if your soil test says you're okay, even in new seeding scenarios. But the bottom line is, if you don't meet either of these criteria, you cannot legally apply phosphorus onto your lawn in New York State. And there's a push for the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation, DEC, look for the zero, right? So lawn fertilizer bags have three numbers. The first one is the amount of nitrogen in that bag. The second one is the amount of phosphorus. So again, if you don't meet these criteria, look for the zero in the middle, make sure it's a zero phosphorus fertilizer. And then I'm just going to lump everything else into this category, which I really don't care to talk about. There are niche situations, sure, where maybe you need a certain nutrient. pH is maybe one. If you're excessively low in pH, less than 5.5, maybe that's problematic. Then you might consider some fertilizers, lime to get the pH back up. But I really don't want to talk about anything other than nitrogen today. If someone starts talking to you about boron and turf grass, you can just turn away and run. Okay, so nitrogen's number one. So timing is a big aspect if you need to apply nitrogen. And here's where our goals for what we want our lawns to be comes into play. We have kind of our good lawns. That's just keeping it green and keeping it covered, covering the soil. Our better lawns, maybe a next step up. And then those highest quality lawns, that deep dark green that maybe you want for aesthetic or recreational purposes. So if you have a good lawn, right, limited traffic, you're mowing it at 3.5 inches, you're going to leave the clippings. This is directly from our turf grass website. You may need 0 applications of fertilizer. If it looks good, that's okay. And at most 1 application. The best time to apply is September. Really kind of that early fall period right after Labor Day is a good marker. I don't love the schedule approach there, but generally that early fall, the reason we say apply it then is you get more root growth, you get more uptake of the fertilizer, you don't waste as much that leaches through the soil profile. So you'll maximize your effect on the turf grass in that sort of September timing. In terms of amount, I would say definitely no more than 0.7 pounds of nitrogen per 1,000 square feet. I would call that the maximum application. For most people, probably 0.5 pound is more what you should be thinking about here. Again, if you're not doing this, asking your landscape contractor if they're applying fertilizer, hey, how much are you applying per 1,000 square feet is a standard way, at least here in the US, of measuring fertilizer amounts. Certainly no more than 0.7 pounds. If you're applying more than that, you can legally do that. But you're probably wasting a lot of that fertilizer. The turf grass is not going to take up 1 pound of nitrogen in the next couple months before winter. So a lot of that will probably go to waste. It'll leach through soil profile. It'll get out to our water. So we don't want that. Now, if we go to better lawns, again, this is gauged by what it's looking like. If it's meeting your expectations, you don't need to apply fertilizer. But if it's not, again, we like that September timing as the primary one, the best time. 1 to 2 applications here. Again, I think following these rules, right, probably more like 0.5 pound on average, no more than 0.7 pounds in each application. if you want a spring timing. And if your lawn's a little bare, if it's thin and early in the year, you can go for a May timing of fertilizer. And then the highest quality lawns, here we're outdoor activities, right? We're removing clippings. We're not returning those clippings, maybe because you don't want them to build up on people's feet when they're running around, or the soccer ball or whatever. Now we have to start fertilizing more. When you're mowing it shorter, again, these probably lawns that are being mowed shorter for recreational or aesthetic purposes, it's going to grow more. So you're going to have to add more nitrogen, 3 to 4 applications per year. Again, that September timing is the best one. And if you're going to go for some other timings, May, June, and later in the fall is good. Here, I'd say no more than 5 pounds as your max. Half a pound, 0.5 pounds max per 1,000 on each application. Let's keep it below 2 pounds total for the year. Again, you can legally apply more than that. The turfgrass lawns are not going to use more than 2 pounds of nitrogen per 1,000 square feet a year. So if you're applying more than that, if your landscape contractor is applying more than that, there's a good chance that those nutrients are leaking out of the system. Again, a water quality concern we absolutely want to avoid. All right, so again, I've talked about growth, and if your lawn's growing fine and it looks fine, you don't need fertilizer. That's kind of your gauge, but what governs that growth? Traffic governs that growth. Here's my residential lawn pest, my dog Lexi. You can see she has reduced my back lawn to very little lawn, and that's because she runs around a lot. There's a lot of traffic there, and I haven't applied fertilizer the first couple of years we've owned this home, but it's probably time because we are seeing bare ground. It's not keeping up with the traffic that my dog's putting on it. Here's an example of traffic you see very commonly, right? Sidewalks, people cutting across, right? They want the shortcut. Fertilizer is not going to fix this situation. This is actually a soil physical property issue now. We're going to talk about that in a little bit. But a good image just to illustrate, traffic, people using the lawn will govern growth. The more traffic you have on the lawn, the more fertilizer and the more growth you need to respond to that. Lawn age, right? New seedings, you can apply fertilizer, nitrogen more when you're establishing a seeding, up to 1 pound per 1,000 square feet in the first 60 days. That's the maximum, I'd say, to try and get that turf grass growing. The reason is it doesn't have a root system yet. You got to put those nutrients right where the seed is. Now, conversely, if you have an older lawn that has an accumulation of organic matter in the soil, it has literally built a soil for itself. You need less fertilizer for older lawns because they have that organic matter to self-sustain, especially if you're returning the clippings. Turf species, we'll talk again a little bit later about this, but certain turf species need more or less fertilizer. Kentucky bluegrass, perennial ryegrass will need more than some of our fescues, our tall fescues, fine fescues. And irrigation, right? If you have an irrigated lawn and you're keeping soil moisture adequate, it will likely grow more than an unirrigated lawn. And then the soils, of course, as well, right? So sand and a sand-based soil versus a clay-based soil will affect soil moisture and therefore growth. So a question to ask your landscape contractor if you're working on them for a contract is, will you adjust fertilizer based on growth? Scheduling before the season even starts, fertilizer applications, doesn't consider how the turf grass is growing at that time, right? So not all landscape, and probably most landscape contractors are not going to be able to accommodate this, but at least trying to talk with them about it, at least changing their rates, right? Don't apply a 1/2 pound, apply 1/4 pound. Trying to adjust for growth. Again, prioritizing that September timing as the number one. And here's a little note, growth limited areas. So targeting only spots on the lawn that maybe receive more traffic with nitrogen. You got a little spot in the backyard that your dog runs around, my dog runs the edge of the fence, right? Because she's chasing cars or other dogs or whatever. That area is going to need more nitrogen to recover from excess traffic than the corner of the lawn where the dog never hangs out because nothing interesting is there, right? So spot treating, see if your landscaper is amenable to maybe only treating certain parts of the lawn. And then, of course, look for zero, right? Zero phosphorus if we don't meet those two legal definitions of using phosphorus in New York. All right, seeding. So one of the most underrated things in lawns is seed. Seed selection, how we're going to irrigate and fertilize new seedlings is important. Here's our turfgrass species and variety guidelines from our website. Again, you guys will get these links after, but it's got a whole lot of data and information in there on how to select the proper seed for your lawn. Also, how to identify which turf grasses you have on your lawn. That's probably important too. Some of the standards for lawns in New York have been Kentucky bluegrass, perennial ryegrass. You'll notice they are not shade tolerant. They are not very drought tolerant, right? So if you have a shady lawn that maybe doesn't have irrigation, you have some better options over here with the fine and tall fescues, right? They're very good being drought tolerant, much better in the shade. You can see the nitrogen requirements here, right? We've got some really big nitrogen requirements. These need updating. This is probably less now, but much more on the Kentucky bluegrass than, for example, the fine fescue, which needs a lot less fertilizer. Here's a good little sort of triangle to figure out, okay, if I have full sun, if I really want that sort of high quality dark green look, Kentucky bluegrass, perennial ryegrass is the way to go. It's going to require a lot of inputs, but that's what's going to get you that product. If you've got less mowing, you're not going to apply nitrogen, you've got no irrigation, here's your tall fescue. And then if you're on the shade spectrum, your fine fescues are the way to go. So this is a cool document if you want to learn more about seed selection and what you have at your site. Would be a good thing to check out. Here's just an example, right? These are two turfgrass species, tall fescue on the left, Kentucky bluegrass on the right. Both managed to a low input, what we would qualify as a low input program, no fertilizer other than establishment, no irrigation, just routine mowing. Look at how the tall fescue responds compared to this traditional Kentucky bluegrass, right? So again, knowing what your goals are, what you want to put into the lawn is going to drive what seed you should select. Now, establishing seed is a little tough. Here's where we're going to be watering a lot, almost 2 to 3 times per day. Keeping the area moist is really important when you're establishing seed. Earlier, I'm talking about that light and frequent irrigation scenario. You want to avoid that when you have established turf. Here, we need to keep water right at the surface level so we get germination. That's really important. Up to a pound of nitrogen early on. You can split that into 2 applications. Mowing can start when you get to about 3.5 inches. You want to then, once you get enough growth, you want to start conditioning the turf grass to understand that it's going to be mowed, and then it will start to become more dense when you start mowing it. So once you get to 3.5 height of cut, you can start mowing it pretty frequently. And this is all establishing seed on really a bare area of the lawn. But overseeding is also an option, right? Just throwing seed on a thin lawn, an existing thin lawn, is really underrated. Throw some seed there in the spring and fall. Just throw it down and do your normal thing. Mow. If you're going to put up one fertilizer application, put it out. That will improve the weed seed bank. It'll increase the amount of turf in the weed seed bank and can help you fill in those thin areas where maybe you haven't done that in the past. Now, seed is more expensive these days. The supply is lower. That's a bit of an issue, but still a very affordable option, even being almost double the price it was last year. Still a really affordable option to help thin areas in the lawn. So again, talking with a landscape contractor, will you select the right seed for my site? Will you consider the environmental conditions, the soil types, the amount of inputs, and select the right seed? And then I wanted to finish today just on a couple notes about general management of plants that can be translated to turfgrass management. IPM, Integrated Pest Management. This is really about minimizing environmental, health, and economic risks by using the lowest risk options first to address our issues. So if you've got a bare area in the lawn that fills in with weeds, before going to an herbicide application, you or your landscape contractor should consider, okay, what can I do differently mowing that might change this? Maybe physically altering the soil. We're going to talk about that in a little bit. Can that alleviate this problem? If I've got grubs in the lawn, there's biological controls. Nematodes, beneficial nematodes can work for grub control. They're a lower risk option than this top one, which is chemical, right? Pesticides, insecticides, herbicides, fungicides. So trying to use all these lower risk approaches before you get to that chemical intervention is really the crux of IPM. Here's how it comes in when you're looking at, for example, a common lawn issue, grubs. Scouting, right? Scouting is number one. We have the Cornell Grub ID tool, right? You can use a penny. You can look at how big it is, when in the year you're seeing the grubs. Really easy system to use that can help you identify which grub it is. That matters for control. We've got scouting videos that show you how to scout your lawn for grubs. So first of all, you need to, if you think you have a grub problem, it'd be good to check and make sure you have grubs, that you have grubs, B, what kind of grubs they are. And then the final part, which is really important, is C, are they above the threshold values? So again, in our grub website, we have threshold values for the number of grubs before the lawn will experience damage from feeding on the roots. So you can see some of these are 80, 18, 20, 30, 40 grubs per square foot is the threshold value. So if you have less than that, your turf is probably not going to experience aesthetic issues from grub feeding. Now, some of them, green Jew beetle, the oriental beetle, the May June beetle, they have lower thresholds, right? So those grubs will feed more and cause more issues. So it's important to know what grub you have and what population densities there are before you begin treating. So again, this is something you should ask your landscape contractor. If they come to you with a contract early in the year that says we're going to put grub control out at this time, they should really know that you have grubs and that they're above threshold values before they make that application. So maybe talking to them and saying, hey, can we make sure I have grubs before we unnecessarily apply an insecticide? Weeds. So again, the IPM approach here, the best defense is a healthy, dense stand of turf grass. If you have weeds, you probably have bare areas in the turf grass. Here's an example of crabgrass encroaching on a golf course fairway. They didn't have a history of crabgrass, but over the last couple of years, with COVID reductions in the budget, they couldn't manage these fairways, apply water. You have bare areas, and what happens to crabgrass moves in. So if we kept this a dense stand of turf like it was in the past, we wouldn't have had these issues. Having a history matters too. So if you've never seen crabgrass or grubs or dandelion on your lawn, do you need to apply an herbicide? Especially if you have a dense, healthy turf grass, that's a good question to ask. And then the final one is, are weeds bad? And for some people, the answer is yes, that's completely fine. For other people, we have things now like bee lawns, the University of Minnesota, a lot of cool research on planting mixes. I actually saw this at a couple big box stores I was in last week. They have pollinator plantings with some turf grass in it, with some white clover, creeping thyme. Again, great for pollinators. So if you like that in your lawn, you can buy lawn mixes. Here's my cute dog looking at a cute bee on a cute dandelion in November. So of course the satire there is that we have dandelion blooming in November. That's climate change for you up here in Ithaca, New York. But I personally don't care if I have dandelions. I think the pollinators foraging is a good thing on my lawn. So really thinking about non-chemical control methods before getting to herbicides, important with weeds. And then I call it the real issue with lawns. The most ubiquitous issue with lawns is not any of these things. It's not diseases, it's not insect pests, it's not weeds, it's soil physical properties. The structure of the soil, right? How much air is in there? How much water? The percentage of organic matter, and most crucially, the mineral percent. What is in that soil? Is it clay? Is it silt? Is it sand? What percentages? Those really determine how your lawn and your soil function, right? So we see a lot of this sort of bare areas. These sort of bare areas happen on lawns. We've got them here. They hold water. What happens? The turf can't drain well. There's water sitting on there. You get a sunny, hot day. It burns. We call it scalding. So you get dead grass. And then what happens is the weeds are the only ones who can survive in that environment. They proliferate. They send their seed all over the lawn when you have a weed issue. And really the genesis of that whole issue is the soil physical properties that did not allow the lawn to drain. So you see it here in a couple pictures. How can you alleviate that? Really, there's we call these cultural practices, options to physically amend the soil. So right down here, you see an example of aeration. So you stick a soil, use a machine, you stick soil probes in the ground, they take a chunk of soil out and they leave a hole at the end. You can fill these holes, so you can remove all those plugs that you've taken out of the soil, and you can put sand or compost back in the holes that will allow your soil to drain better. It will give it better soil physical properties. So you can do this cultivation aeration method. You can also just do that top dressing method. And those are the two ways of kind of fixing those soil issues that are so common and cause so many other issues. We have a Cornell turf grass show. If you thought it was weird that I study only turf grass, you're going to think it's really weird that we do a turf grass show 2 times a week on YouTube, webinar, and podcasts for the entire spring. My colleague, Dr. Frank Rossi, and I. And last week's show, we talked to Doug Soldat at University of Wisconsin, and we had a great conversation about this exact issue, these soil physical properties. And then if you're going to go that aerating route, if you're going to have a landscaper do that, you need to do it very aggressively, and you need to do it for several years to get the benefits out of it. One aeration practice is going to do literally nothing to your lawn. You need to disrupt a significant amount of that surface. We talk about this in that episode. And you need to really do that for several years before you can see the tangible benefits. Doug suggested, and he did his graduate work here at Cornell on this, instead of ripping up the lawn with an aerator, you can just top dress it. Literally throw compost on the lawn at about 1/2 inch a year. After 5-7 years, you will have developed, you can call it a compost cap, right? 3 inches or so of material that the lawn now sits on and can actually function. You will get drainage. You'll have nutrient holding capacity there, organic matter that the grass can use. The key here he mentions is try to avoid manure sources of compost that are loaded with phosphorus that become water quality issues. Try and avoid that. Try and get like yard waste compost sources. You'll notice these are 2 labor intensive ways to fix this issue. And that's why it's the number 1 issue, because it's not easy to fix. You're going to have to either poke some holes or throw a bunch of material on the lawn, sand or compost, to fix that issue. And that's why it's such a difficult one to solve. So I think I've reached the end here, and it looks like we got a couple questions, which is good. Just some final thoughts for me. You'll notice that the theme was that lawn maintenance doesn't occur on a calendar. These are living, breathing plants, and Mother Nature is never the same 2 years in a row. So it's going to respond much differently every year. So that maintenance needs to be adjusted accordingly. It can't really be on a calendar. And these sorts of core principles, right? The 1/3 rule, mowing higher, irrigating only when necessary, being judicious in the fertilizer you apply, all really important. And thinking about that IPM mentality, right? Trying to avoid those chemical applications, making sure your fundamentals are good before you reach that threshold where you apply a chemical. Not that pesticides are bad. I think they are necessary in a lot of situations. It's just we don't have to get there so quickly, right? Let's take our time. Let's make sure we're good at the fundamentals before we go to that option. So with that, Hillary, I'm going to get rid of my screen so I can see some questions here. It looks like we got a couple.
Thank you so much. That was so helpful. That was lovely to watch. So I think we definitely have one. If you wouldn't mind, would you explain how to determine like 1 pound of nitrogen from a fertilizer bag?
Yeah, so I'm going to try and say it here, Charlotte, but I will also find a resource that will walk you through this as well. So essentially, I talked about those 3 numbers on the bag, right? The first number is the percentage by weight of nitrogen in that bag. So let's say you buy a 10-pound bag of fertilizer, and the first number is 20. So that means that bag has 20% fertilizer out of 10 pounds. That means there's 2 pounds total of nitrogen in that bag. And now what you have to, and here's the next step is, okay, how much surface area am I going to apply that bag of fertilizer to? Typical home lawn, let's say you have a really small lawn. Let's say it's 1,000 square feet. If I were going to put that whole bag down, it's a granular, I put it in my spreader and I put it all on the lawn, I will have just applied 2 pounds of nitrogen on that 1,000 square feet, right? So that's a really high amount. We want to avoid that. So actually what you could do if you want to apply only 0.5 pound of nitrogen per 1,000 square feet, that's the rate, you would only apply 1/4 of that bag. So it would be 2.5 pounds of that bag of fertilizer onto the lawn. It is not intuitive. There are on the labels, you will see sometimes they'll have this bag applies 0.5 pound of nitrogen to 5,000 square feet or whatever. So sometimes on the bag, there will be a label that can guide you a little bit. But the calculations, there's 2 calculations you have to make. How much nitrogen is actually in that bag or pouch of fertilizer, and what is the surface area you're applying it to? And that second part can actually be tough. Like how big is your lawn? Are you going to get a tape measure out and measure your lawn? Probably not. I would recommend you use Google Earth or Google Maps. You can draw, if you don't have a lot of tree cover on your lawn, you can go type in your address and you can use a drawing tool to outline your lawn, and it will give you the size really accurately of your lawn. So that's one way to get the size of your lawn. Other than that, you may have to make some measurements, take a couple, measure how many steps of, how many square steps are around and make some calculations. But to your overall point, Charlotte, it's not super intuitive. It requires 2 steps of calculations. So hopefully I explained it well, and I'll get you guys a resource too to maybe walk you through that as well.
Another question for you. If you have a landscaper who wants to do many applications of fertilizer, and let's say some of the fertilizers that they want to put down are fertilizers with insecticides in them for the common insects that are found in lawns, what would you suggest? Like, do you suggest a fertilizer with an insecticide in it, upwards of 5-6 fertilizer applications over the year through winter? What would you do with something like that?
Yeah, this is where it really comes back down to A, scouting, right? Do you have an actual insect problem? And B, the formulation of those fertilizers. A lot of times you'll get like the 3-in-1. It'll have fertilizer, it'll have grub control, and it will have crabgrass control. Crabgrass control and grub control are not the same timings every year. They should be spread out to actually control the pests. So if they're applying a 3-in-1 fertilizer, chances are at least 1 or maybe 2 parts of that fertilizer are not actually being used when it's being applied. The issue for them is they have a limited supply of products at their disposal. So I think the first question I would ask is, hey, can you guys show me that I have a grub problem? Does your scouting indicate I need grub control? And the second question would be, how much fertilizer is in there? And if it's that sort of May timing and you're making a fertilizer application and maybe crabgrass is coming on, I can see that 2-in-1 scenario, a crabgrass and fertilizer approach being necessary. But it's tough for them because they have limited products to select from. And the thing with landscapers is they need to ensure a certain amount of income from a lawn a year, right? They can't just apply nothing and only mow and make some money. So it's tough for them in those contracts. The first question I would ask is, hey guys, can you just show me and make sure that I have grubs before we do grub control? Not that grub control is bad, but just make sure I have that issue before unnecessarily treating for it.
Awesome. If anyone has any questions, you can feel free. Oh, I think we have another one. And this is actually a question that I was just about to ask you, Carl. So I am on the same wavelength with this person. Where'd it go? But it was about, here it is. I live in a townhouse community. Should the landscaper aerate every year versus top dressing with compost? And I want to initially add, what if you know your soil isn't compacted? What if you know you don't necessarily have a problem with your soil? Do you still need to aerate?
Yeah, that's the important thing you just added there, Hillary. If your soil and lawn is functioning correctly, you don't need aeration. And the funniest thing I've always seen is people with really nice lawns aerating because, hey, that lawn is nice. Why are you spending all that money and effort to aerate it when it's already nice? It doesn't need it. So if your lawn does need those sorts of things, both are good options. Aerating every year is an option. It needs to be very aggressive and probably would need to be done twice a year to get the benefits. I personally like the top dressing with compost option better than aerating. It's less messy. It requires less equipment. Now, the top dressing aspect of it is tough. Landscapers need to be able to secure a compost source that's relatively consistent year to year and be able to apply that to enough depth each year. But I like that approach. You don't disturb the soil as much. If you're doing it in the spring and you're disturbing the soil with aeration, what's going to move in there? Probably weeds. You can get some crabgrass and dandelion establishing really well if you make room for them in the spring. So I like the top dressing with compost approach. Either way, it's going to need to happen for a couple years if your lawn is not performing correctly to have those sorts of tangible benefits in the future.
Awesome. And there was a question about some of the websites that you've been talking about. And so Carl, you will send me all the websites and I will send it out to everyone who's here, as well as we're going to post this on our website. So we will definitely take care of that too. And I think a good question to end on is, say these associations, these boards are waking up to spring and noticing that there's holes in their lawn, that they're trying to figure out what to do for the spring to make sure that their turf looks the way that they want, whether it's a top-notch, golf course level, or it's, I just want some green in my lawn. What do you think would be a great first step? How would you approach it?
Yeah, so it's tough because when you see those issues in the spring, you think I got to do something now, and that maybe something in the spring caused that issue, or maybe the winter caused that issue. The reality is that a lot of times the stuff that happened the years before has caused that issue. So there's a legacy effect to building towards bare areas or areas that don't look good. There's also going to be a long-term effect of improving those areas. It's not going to happen fast unless you sod. If you sod, that's the answer to all your problems. You can just strip it off, have a landscaper put the sod down. That's great. Yay. But the solution to those issues is going to take a while, whether it's seeding, whether it's localized aeration and top dressing and applying overseeding and trying to grow that back in. It's not going to happen quick with any of those options except for sod. I do notice another question here in the post about adding compost, top dressing compost to 3 inches and potentially a perched water table. That is definitely a concern. If you get compost that has the right physical properties, it will hopefully mitigate that. In any case, it will be better than what you had, which is basically a bathtub to begin with, and it can't get through the bottom to drain. So that's an issue, and that's something actually at golf courses where you build putting greens, you build it to a 12-inch depth, 10-inch depth to create a perched water table that sort of builds up and then releases when there's enough water in there. So that could be an issue. It's going to be better than what you had. So, but yes, for sure, it could create a perched water table.
Awesome. Well, Carl, thank you so much for coming and talking about lawn care for everyone here. I know I learned a thing or two myself. It was really great having you here.
Thanks a bunch, Hillary. Yeah, this is fun. It's I know it's a little crazy talking about grass for an hour, but thanks everyone for sticking with me. And I'll get you guys those resources because that'll be something interesting for everybody to look through.
Yeah, and thank you all so much for coming, and we will see you next month, Thursday, May 19th from 12 to 1 as well, talking about the basics of tree care and how to find a tree care professional. Thanks so much.
Hi, everybody.